whether people are getting 10 views on a video or they're getting 10 million views on a video. I think that vulnerability is something that's felt by everybody, and I've seen it with people at many different points of their career. Some people you would never expect would have any sort of kind of issues with their confidence in putting something out or anything like that. It's something that everyone struggles with, and that's one of the hardest parts about existing in a space like this.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Oh My Career Goodness. My name is Hamza Islam, and on this podcast, I talk to Gen Zers from different fields about their journey and how they became the person they are today. One of the coolest things about Gen Zers is that they love making an impact. Whatever field that they're doing, they want to inspire people so that they can not only have a better life today, but also in the future. But when it comes to inspiring people, we have to really understand the full story. And that doesn't just mean focusing on all the good things and the accolades, but also the difficult or the different obstacles they had overcome, whether that be themselves, from others, or whatever they went through in their life, because that's really what makes a human being, is the good things and the bad things that will shape a person into who they are today and who they want to be in the future. And I really love being able to interact with different people on this podcast and learn about their story. And I hope you, the listener, or listeners, are inspired as well, in knowing that you can create change, you can do something special, doesn't matter who you are or what your background is. Now, my guest this week is Hunter Williams, who is a documentary filmmaker and digital content producer who specializes in unscripted storytelling and algorithm optimized content for brands and social media personalities. He has worked for people such as David Blaine and Addison Rae, and has worked for brands such as Coca-Cola and Hollister. One of the things I love about Hunter is that he specializes in storytelling. And it's similar to what I do with my podcast, being able to talk about a person's story in a honest, authentic way, because that's what is really happening, without putting any filter or painting an image that is really not the real image. So I love being able to talk to people who focus on that. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation and getting to know Hunter more personally. So Hunter, thank you so much for joining Oh My Curry Goodness.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the mission behind the podcast. So yeah, excited to be here.
Of course, thank you so much. And before we start, I was going through your website just to get ready for this podcast, and I thought it was really interesting. What stuck out to me was, I think you're from New Zealand, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's that's true. Yeah, and hence the accent. Yeah, I'm from New Zealand. I'm currently based in Los Angeles though, and I've been here for about coming up on 4 years in a couple of months. So yeah, time is flowing, but I love it here.
That's so cool. Now, the thing is, for a long time, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, New Zealand mostly speaks English, but I know that there's another language there. I don't know exactly what it is. I don't know if you know it, but like, um, yeah, I heard there's like another language. It's like your guys' own language. Is that true or?
That is true. Yeah, that is true. So New Zealand has three official languages: English, Te Reo Māori, which is the language of the indigenous culture, and New Zealand Sign Language as well as an official language.
That's really cool. So it's interesting because so my parents are from Bangladesh, which is in South Asia,
Mm.
and they speak English, Bengali, which is their language, and then Hindi, because Bangladesh and India are like next to each other. And so if you were to ask me, Hamza, can you speak Bengali or Hindi? I wouldn't be able to do it. And I went to Bangladesh not this past summer, but in 2022. And my mom was like, or I told my mom, like, should I speak Bengali? I don't know much. And she said, just speak English. We'll be your translator for the next 2 weeks. So I don't know about you. Can you speak their language? I forgot the name of the language already, but can you speak
No
it, or
worries.
is it one of those things where it's like you might either you stick to English or you need someone to kind of translate it for you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely English is my first language. I don't really speak Te Reo Māori. I know a few words. Growing up in New Zealand, you're kind of surrounded by it. So there are like a few words here and there, and at school you learn a little bit. But no, I don't. I would never claim to be able to speak it. It is something that I would have an interest in learning, though. Um, but yeah, I don't know too many people that can speak the language, which I think is a shame. But I think it's something that more and more as time goes on, people are interested in learning and picking up. So yeah, I'm hoping that one day, we'll all be kind of learning it and kind of keeping that language alive.
I find the same thing with learning about Bengali. So I really want to learn it because, I mean, as someone who has Bengali parents or whose parents came from Bangladesh, I really want to learn their language. But sometimes I get jealous because my friends can speak Bengali, and so when I speak it, I'm like, oh gosh, this is really bad. So it's definitely a learning process. But
I'm really envious of people that can speak heaps of different languages. I can speak an all right level of Spanish because I did a student exchange there when I was younger. By no means fluent or anything like that, but sometimes you'll meet people, especially from places like Europe, that can speak like five, six different languages, and I don't know how they do it, but it's something I'm envious of and very impressed by.
oh my gosh, yeah. It's a weird life can be weird sometimes, but we're gonna learn and get through it. But I do want to talk about, your relationship with storytelling in film. And I I've said it so many times in different episodes, but it's always the little things, and I'm sure everyone knows it. It's the little things that make the big difference. Sometimes it's like you see something, and the moment you see it, you want to continue. You want to do this for the rest of your life.
Mm.
And I saw somewhere where I think you picked up a handycam at the age of 8, or somewhere around early on, and because of that experience you just started getting involved in film. And I'm curious to know what I mean. Some like when you're little, we all like when people are little, they have many dreams, and sometimes it can be rational, sometimes it can be irrational. But the cool thing about being kids is that they are imaginative and they're creative. But very few people actually get to live up or get to keep that passion in the future. And so for you, when you picked up that handycam at a young age, hopefully I'm saying it right, handycam at such a young age, what was it that made that moment special and allowed you to keep getting involved in this? And it wasn't something where you were like, yeah, let's just do it for fun and then go away. It was more of, here's something that I found interesting and let me just run with it. And here you are today, still doing filming and photography.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. I'm not sure exactly why I stuck with it. As a kid, I was interested in a bunch of different things. My mum was someone who's very creative, so she was always encouraging us to do different creative things like painting and drawing and all that kind of stuff. I suck at both of those things. I am not a drawer. I'm not a painter by any means. Um, but yeah, I think when I was about 8, I picked up a Handycam, which ironically I still have in that next room. And I just started making YouTube videos with my friends and videos with my friends, and it just kind of stuck. And I think it was interesting because at that age I decided already. I was like, I'm going to be a filmmaker one day. I think it came from, a lot of people at that time had been talking about Peter Jackson, because obviously, he's a very well-known New Zealand filmmaker, did the Lord of the Rings series. And at about that time was kind of, there were rumbles of the Hobbit series starting to film in New Zealand. And I think, just hearing people talking about him a lot, I was asking my parents, who was Peter Jackson? What does he do? And they explained it to me. And I just said, oh, I'm going to do that. And yeah, as I say, started kind of making little videos and YouTube videos with friends and just, doing things for fun. And it just stuck. And then when I was about 13, I started, my step aunt asked me to film her wedding. And then at that wedding, some other people asked me, oh, can you come and film our wedding? And then it kept going. And I used to just film weddings over my summers and throughout the school year. And that's how I kind of like funded my life at high school and was able to go out on the weekend with friends and that sort of thing. And it just, I don't know. Yeah, one thing's led to another. And here I am, however many years later, 10, like 16 years later, and still doing it.
I relate to you in the sense that when I was maybe I'm trying to remember 2015, so 13 or 14 years old, my dad wanted me to not to pursue it, but to just at least try. There was a course I took which was about like art, and because one of his friends' kids at the time was like, I think he was getting into like oil painting and he was doing really good, and so he was like, you should try something like this, and I was like, okay, I'll try. And I remember doing it, not oil painting, but just drawing in general, because I had no idea how to draw, like not just draw a stick figure, but actually be more creative. And I was terrible at it. So I relate to you in that aspect. But one of the things that I really have come to understand and appreciate is that, people sometimes say art doesn't really mean anything, or doesn't make it like it doesn't really make the world a better place, but sometimes it does. And it maybe it might not be directly, but sometimes how you express things is it has invokes a feeling, and sometimes that feeling can be motivation, inspiration, or understanding a person's perspective and why it was made. So I say that because I can relate to you in the sense that, even though sometimes what we do is art, like not the kind of art that we're normally thinking of, but I do want to ask if how often you kind of overthinked or panicked when you were still early on, because sometimes what I do, so I've started this podcast since January, so it's been about 8 months, is sometimes I panic and wonder if I'm going to make a career out of this, if I'm going to be successful, if it's going to go well. And so for you, there are a lot of filmmakers like you. And sometimes when people think of filmmaking, they think like Peter Jackson, Avenger, like action movies, Christopher Nolan, like all these incredible filmmakers. And it's like, guys, filming doesn't just mean like you don't have to, like, there are different types of filmmakers who are doing great things. I'm wondering for you, did you ever have, like, I guess, a doubt or like some sort of like worry that maybe the thing that you're really passionate about may not be something that will help you in the future, if that makes sense?
When I was younger, no. I had like a naive confidence that I was like, someone has to do it, so it's going to be me. As I've gotten older, that doubt has only increased. I think as I've grown and realized just how difficult it is to make a career in something like this. I still have a lot of confidence in myself, but equally, I'm really, really hard on myself. I very rarely will like something that I make. And it's yeah, there's always doubt. And I think there's with any sort of creativity, whether it's painting, podcasting, making videos or music, there's a certain level of like vulnerability because you're making something that you're basically putting out into the world and saying, I think this is cool. I made this, I put myself into this, and you're putting it out there to say, I think other people are going to like this, or I think other people should see it too. And there's a lot of vulnerability in that. And with any vulnerability, it's scary, it's scary. It's scary taking that leap and putting it out there. And that's why I have a lot of respect for people that do, whether people are getting 10 views on a video or they're getting 10 million views on a video. I think that vulnerability is something that's felt by everybody. And I've seen it with people at many different points of their career. Some people you would never expect would have any sort of kind of issues with their confidence in putting something out or anything like that. It's something that everyone struggles with. And that's one of the hardest parts about existing in a space like this.
Absolutely. Everything you just said made me smile, because oftentimes when you're putting yourself, like, I'll use my example, just for clear, just to make it easier. There will be days where I will publish something and then I'll look back, and then the moment I make one mistake, whether that be like stuttering or maybe I missed the mark in a conversation, I immediately think I'm the worst at what I do. And it's 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 because you care so much about what you do, but because sometimes it's like you have to figure out how to develop a really positive relationship with yourself, because when it comes to authenticity doesn't mean doing things for yourself, but also thinking about what other people are thinking. It's doing things for yourself and realizing that everything from the beginning of a project to the end of a project is coming from you. And so sometimes it's really important to develop that positive relationship. And if you don't mind me asking, like, how do you develop that relationship with yourself? Because especially those moments where you are hard on yourself, you're critical, those things happen. But how do you make sure that you don't let that harsh criticism on yourself overtake the impact that you are trying to make?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I think that's kind of an existential crisis a little bit, at least for me, because it's sometimes it is difficult to do that. And no, it's at the same level at all times, whether it was 4 years ago when I was just starting in the US to now. If I had looked at where I was, if I was where I was now 4 years ago, I would have thought back then, oh well, that's really awesome. I'm glad that you've made it that far. But there's always going to be something to nitpick and focus on. And I think, looking back on my old self, I always cringe, but I also think that that's kind of an important thing as much as it sucks. Because I think if you do look back on your old self and you cringe, that's just a signal that you've grown and that you've developed and that you've changed. And I think that's important. I think if you look back on everything that you'd made and you loved it and you think it's just like the best thing ever and there's nothing to change, well, then I think you would find that you hadn't grown and that you would probably stagnate and you would remain in that space. So I think it's an important balance. I think it's important to be critical of ourselves so that we can learn and develop. But as you say, to not let it kind of completely overtake us or discourage us or make us give up. As for how to do that, I'm not sure. If anyone else has advice, I would love to take it.
For sure. I have been able to go back and listen to past episodes that I published, and it's just so cringe because it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did it this way or I said this way. But looking back, I realize I'm glad that it's hard to it's hard at the moment to recognize, it's hard to be grateful at the moment because you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this. But now when you look back and you realize where you are now compared to when you first started, it is about growth. And so something that I'm trying to work on, and maybe you probably touched on a bit, which is try to accept that you're going to grow at the heat of the moment. So when you do make a mistake, don't beat yourself over it. Realize, okay, I made a mistake. How can I grow from it? And while it's important to be able to acknowledge that at some point, the earlier you can detect it, the earlier you can realize, the earlier that you, I guess, what am I trying to say? The earlier you are able to change the mindset instead of being hard on yourself or being like saying it's like the end of the world in some sense. I mean, I know that's extreme, but to instead go, okay, I made a mistake or I did something bad. How can I grow from it? The earlier you can do that, the earlier, excuse me, you can do that, the better. So yeah, it's difficult, but I like sometimes when I see other people doing something, I try to just be the best supporter possible because you don't know what they're going through, and so it's unfortunate that people really want to bash on people's mistakes. And I know we are our biggest enemies, but sometimes we just gotta be kind to ourselves and then from the outside watching in try to be the best friend or ally as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that we live in a world now where we are so used to being gratified immediately with everything that we do. Like we go on our phones, we're immediately entertained. You go on TikTok, you're getting dished up content like there's no tomorrow, and it's all tailored exactly for you. And I think we're just used to getting what we want as quickly as possible because as time goes on, as technology develops, as society develops, we things get better. For a lot of, not everyone in the world, but I think for a lot of people, we live quite comfortable lives now in comparison to the rest of history, and so it's hard to not get what we want. And to be able to do something creative and to develop a skill, it takes time, it takes work, it takes revision, it takes reflection. And that's not something that people in our generation, I think a lot of people are super used to. And so that is a little bit of a cold plunge, but at the end of the day, I think that like drip feed of dopamine as opposed to an immediate rush of dopamine is something that is important for us. And I think that at the end of the day, it makes something, that we've really worked for. It makes it that much more special when, we start to go, okay, that is coming to fruition, or I'm actually good at that now and I didn't used to be. I think that's a really important thing as well.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about this later on because I thought what you just said was so interesting and I thought this conversation was really needed. Um, I do want to ask you if especially growing up, right? Because sometimes when you're starting something early on, they may not make like something that you find passionate may not make sense, but they might have a bigger meaning later on in the future. And so for you, like you mentioned, uh, doing weddings at 13, picking up a handycam at the age of 8, were there any photos or videos you remember capturing that feel like it means a lot to you to this day? Or do you find that maybe they're good, but they don't have, I guess like this sense of like, it doesn't mean, I don't want to say it doesn't mean much, but it's like, it's, how do I say this? It's like, there are photos or videos that you capture that mean a lot to you, but sometimes maybe they do, but it doesn't like, you don't think about it as much. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like, are there any that like really stick out in your mind?
Yeah, there are different pieces of work that I think stick out for different reasons, for better or for worse. Some are really important to me on a personal level. For example, I did a short documentary when I was at university or college, as you say here, about my grandmother who had Alzheimer's at the time and who has since passed. And just at the end of last year, when she passed, that was played at her funeral, and so that was something that was incredibly rewarding, and I think for me, personally, is like a very important piece of work that I like to look back on. And yeah, I think in that vein, there are different projects that are important for different reasons. Maybe it was that project that introduced me to that person, or that project that ended up getting me that job, or whatever it may be. I think everything that I've made has holds some sort of value like that. And at the end of the day, all of it is an amalgamation that has kind of created the person that I am now, and the career that I have now. Um, and so I'm grateful for all of them. But as I say, looking back on our work, sometimes it's fun and sometimes it can make you cringe. More often, it's the latter for me. But looking back on old stuff and cringing, as I say, is important because it's a signal that I've grown.
Well, firstly, yeah, sorry to hear about your grandma. Um,
Thank you.
it's yeah, sometimes like these things mean so much, and it's hard because it's like, this person means so much to you, and yeah, I don't know what to say, but you know, you bring up a really interesting, but like we said, like sometimes things that we're not even they're not even like for like sometimes the things that we do for ourselves or like raising awareness to something, especially early on. I mean, it can create so much power and it means so much to you. Sometimes it can be more than the things that you're doing now just because of how much it means to you. So I know I kind of just rambled, but it was like, wow, I didn't know about that. So thank you for being able to share that. Um,
Of course.
you obviously talked about the part where you sometimes cringe, and the thing is whether you see something as like from the outside point of view, so like if I'm seeing the things that you do, you can go like, oh, this was really great, or okay, I can understand why this person cringed. But I want to know more about the specific obstacles that you overcame, because filmmaking, it's not just the story that you're telling, but it can be other things that you had to understand, learn to make sure that the final project is good, right? So it's not just the storytelling, it could just be maybe timing, it could be doubt from other people, it could be, I don't know, it could be any obstacle that prevents you from trying to be the best filmmaker you can be. And so for you, what were some of the obstacles that you had to overcome or what were some of the obstacles you had to overcome while you were trying to get into this filmmaking industry? And then what are some of the obstacles that you're still going through now? Because obviously, you're doing a lot of great things. And I forgot to mention that I think you're a finalist for IMDb's new filmmaker of the year. So obviously, yeah, there's a lot of growth, but still, like, what are some of the challenges that you went through and are currently going through today?
Yeah, I mean, I think something I'm trying to work on at the moment is to have the positive things speak louder in my mind than the negatives. But that's easier said than done, at least for me. I think one of the biggest obstacles is a lack of confidence. Whether that's coming from an internal feeling, which it is primarily, or whether it's the way I'm perceiving, what's coming from the external as well. Whether that's a video not performing in the way I thought it would, people not responding to it. People always seem to like the stuff that I make that's not necessarily the thing I'm the most proud of or whatever. So it's like those things don't always align. There was the teacher that once told me that I would never be a good storyteller. And even just a couple of months ago, there was a person who, I lost a contract for a job because the person said my work wasn't cool enough or wasn't original enough. And those sort of things, they I try and act like they don't harm me, but they definitely do. And the way that I internalize them is not always super healthy. And it's also a very competitive industry with technology now. There's millions of people doing what I do as well, and it's very easy to compare and look at someone else's work and go, wow, gosh, I wish I was like them. I wish I could do stuff like that. So there's that side of it. I also think living in the US has presented a lot of challenges for me as well. Whether at its most basic form, visas has been a really difficult a part of my life. But it's just taken a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of money to be able to kind of facilitate that. I had a job when I was working here that didn't pay my salary for a number of months, which really put me on the back foot. And that was immediately followed by a client who did the exact same thing. I think I remember it at New Year's, last year. So the very beginning of this year, I look back on the year, and when I was doing my finances, I figured out that 50% of all of the money that I earned last year never got paid to me, and that left me in like a really difficult situation. And honestly, those difficulties, but also the way that I had to deal with them by, going out and trying to make a living just to kind of stay ahead and not get evicted from my apartment and all those kind of things, they naturally also distracted me from what I believe my purpose to be, which is creating impactful storytelling. And there's a lot of projects that I want to make for me and for my career, and for, the world. But, those kind of slipped through the cracks a wee bit because of those difficulties. And that kind of led me to quite a dark place. But I think kind of being reminded of my purpose and trying not to let that slip and try and constantly, get that back and remember why I'm doing this, not just how I need to do it to survive, is, I think, a really important thing. So, and that's really kind of pulled me out of that dark cloud. And yeah, I think that's, been a really important thing to learn. But I think it's also really important that all of those challenges have taught me really important lessons. They've changed the way that I do business now. They've changed the way that I work now, and in a lot of ways for the better, not just for me, but also for the product, for the clients, for everyone around me. And so, yeah, there's obstacles all the time, big and small. Every day there's obstacles, and I think a big part of my job as a director is you're problem solving. You're making a series of decisions that eventually lead to something getting made. And so, all of those decisions are obstacles. You're at a fork in the road. You don't know whether to go left or whether to go right. And the more you develop your skills, the better you get at what you do, the better you are at making those decisions and choosing which way to go. So, whilst there have been a lot of very difficult times and obstacles over the last 4 or 5 years, especially, I'm grateful for all of them, because at the end of the day, like, they've taught me different skills that are gonna, hold me in better stead for the future.
Wow. Here's the thing, when you were talking, I was also thinking about what are some obstacles that I've tried to overcome. And really just comes, like, I was just thinking like confidence. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll try to get other people to help me and whatever that may be. So whether that be, hey, can you promote it on your Instagram story, and try to, raise awareness, or not raise awareness, but like try to get the word out. And sometimes people are like, oh, I don't feel comfortable, or they'll say no, or they don't answer. And so sometimes I like personalize criticism, and I'm trying to understand, like, maybe there's a reason why they didn't do it, and it doesn't really have to be me. So sometimes it's like you're being more harsher than you need to be. But I never understood, or I can never relate to you with the visa, or the visa in the finance perspective. And it scares me because, because everyone has to take care of finances at some point. And so the thing is, like, yes, your impact is important, but also it's income in some sense. And I've had a conversation with a couple of guests where it's like, how do you balance the two things? Because on one hand, you're trying to connect with your audience or impact your audience, but at the same time, you want to make a career out of it. And do you have enough funds to be able to support yourself and your mission? So that's something that I'm actually scared about. I'm not gonna lie, because the confidence part scares me. But now, because as you get older, you have more responsibilities, and so now it's like, how do you balance everything to make sure that you're able to take care of yourself, take care of your needs, and also pursue whatever it is that you're pursuing. But
Yeah, I mean, adulting is hard, right? Adulting is really difficult. Not just, I mean, from that perspective, but one of the things I also really found difficult was, from the age of 5 in New Zealand, I don't know what it is here, the age that you start school in the US. I think it's probably about the same, 5 or 6. But your whole life, you're is segmented into years. And at the beginning of the year, you start the school year, and by the end of the year, you're working towards some sort of usually set of exams or different assignments, and everything's structured. And then once you finish school, a lot of people will then go to college, and you'll go to college, and then the same thing. Your life to a degree is structured, less structured than high school, but structured in that you're working towards a degree. But I found that once I left film school, that it was just like, okay, now you're out in the world. Now you've got, like, if you're lucky, 50 years, 40 years. How you use it is completely up to you, and no one else really gives a shit. So figure it out. And that's kind of a daunting thing. And that was something I was like, oh, I feel a little lost. And I think it's a pretty common thing amongst people in their early 20s to feel that way.
there's something else that I wanted to add, which is you talked about how as you throughout your life you've learned how to problem solve. Think about, how can I find ways to make everything work for me? And I know you're a filmmaker. I mean, that's what you are, but also, do you ever feel like you are an entrepreneur, or do you feel like you have like an entrepreneurial side of you? And I know, like, and it was funny because when you said that, I had a couple of guests talk about what an entrepreneur means, which is, it doesn't always have to mean making money, but it can also be problem solving. And problem solving can not only just mean like, how do you make your business better, but how can you make yourself better? So I don't know, like when you said that, that for some reason came to my mind. So do
Mm.
you feel like you have that in you, or is it just kind of irrelevant?
Definitely. I mean, on a basic level here in LA, like I have my own company and run my own company. So yeah, there is like a level of entrepreneurship there. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I think with anything in life, with any sort of business or career, at the end of the day, when you really break it down, you're solving problems for people. If you've got a business and you're not solving a problem for anyone, then it's probably not going to be a very good business. So I think yeah, I mean that's really what life is, right? Is we make a we are born, and then we have a sensory experience for, if we're lucky, 80 something years, and we make a lot of decisions along the way that ultimately lead us to where we're going to end up, and then we die. So I mean, I think problem solving is a huge part of anyone's life, whether you're a creative, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're at high school, whether you work at 7-Eleven, whether you whatever you do. It's Problem solving is a massive part of our lives.
I do want to talk about your company later on, because I know that's something that we talked about before doing this podcast. But one thing I do want to talk about is storytelling. And you talked about, when you were talking about your obstacles, about how someone said that your work wasn't good because it wasn't original enough. And storytelling is difficult because you, especially authentic storytelling, because it's, how do you make sure that the work that you're putting in is really coming from you? And so, like, you have to let people know, like, sometimes not just the story, but also let people know that you're I guess a work in progress, because storytelling and authenticity are what make us human beings. So when I do my podcast, I do worry about, when it comes to storytelling, there are certain things that I worry about, but I want to know from your perspective first, what are some things that you find difficult when it comes to telling authentic stories?
It's a really good question. I mean, there's a huge variety of things. I think one when it comes to like commissioned and paid work, um, I saw this on a podcast the other day and I thought it was a really good point that I want to share. And that is, someone was basically saying that when you get hired for a job, whether that's like a full-time employee working at Meta or whether you're doing a film project for someone, you're getting hired for a reason. It's because they've seen your work, they've seen your resume, they've interviewed you, they've talked to you, and they think that you're the person for the job. So you can kind of park that to the side and go, you've been chosen for a reason. Now do what you do best and make the best possible thing that's within your realm. I think everyone is a work in progress. I think anyone that claims to not be a work in progress is completely full of it or deluded. No matter how old you are, I think we're always improving. We're always getting better. So I think there's that part of it. For me as well, I think, when it comes to telling authentic stories, I mean, I think that's just a skill in itself in being able to get that out of people and being able to make people feel comfortable to share their story with you. And that's just a learned skill. It's a level of EQ that you have to develop. And so, yeah. And I think also for me, sometimes with what I think my purpose is, which is telling impact-based stories, especially in the unscripted space. So, documentaries, interviewing people, that's what I love doing. That's what really kind of lights my fire and gets me out of bed in the morning. A lot of times the stories that I want to tell don't necessarily align with a lot of commercial interests. It's not always the case, but sometimes it is the case. And so being able to facilitate the telling of those stories in the way that I want to, which typically requires money, it requires budget and crew and equipment and all that sort of thing, can be difficult. So yeah, I think there's a variety of obstacles, but I think it's just being able to tell authentic stories is a learned skill like anything else. And it's something that I'm working on and most definitely am a work in progress in that department.
The two things that you just said, comfort and unscripted, are the two things that I'm working on when it comes to my podcast and what I'm trying to do when it comes to storytelling. So I'll explain the comfort part first, because there is nothing worse than making someone, the person you're interviewing or talking to, feel uncomfortable. And I've seen interviews, whether it be podcasts, talk shows, or just like one-on-one interviews, if they're promoting something, where the guest will leave mid-interview because something the host said it was something that they didn't like. And so for me, like that's something I think about in the back of my head, which is that, I want my guests to be able to be honest and authentic, but I also know that there's a certain level that you cannot go to because it makes them feel uncomfortable. So if I am ever in a situation where, like, let's say I'm interviewing you and you say, thank you for your time, but I don't want to continue this interview, then then I'm like, oh man, I did really bad. And so making sure that a person is comfortable sharing their story but not being too personal is a challenge. And it's still something I'm working on to this day, because I want to be able to be unique, but I also know that I don't want to be in a situation where I now look like the enemy.
Mm. I
When it
think it's
comes,
sorry, I was just gonna say, I think it's a bit of a dance, and I think it just requires being present in the moment. I think a lot of things when interviewing people, I think the golden rule is listen to the person that you're interviewing, because a lot of people when they're interviewing, it's so easy to just think, okay, what's my next question, what am I doing, how does the shot look, oh okay, it looks all right, and not actually listen to what the person's saying, and just feeling out that thing. At the end of the day, it's a conversation. Just because there's cameras in the room, it shouldn't change the way that you approach people, especially when it comes to sensitive topics. I've seen that a lot online and in person with celebrities as well, is that people kind of objectify them because they put them on this pedestal. They think, oh, because they're famous, they must have confidence that's so high, and nothing that I say could ever kind of offend them because they're just so used to being in the public eye and that sort of thing. But if you're a dick to someone, then it doesn't matter whether they have 100 million followers or whether they're Joe down the street. It's still, you can still offend people. And so I think it's just, you just got to walk that line carefully and just be a decent human being and be conscious of the other person's thoughts and be conscious of the fact that someone is being extremely vulnerable by putting themselves in front of a camera and being out and wanting to answer those questions. So yeah, I think it's a dance, really.
Yeah, and something you said, because when you were talking about how you want to make sure you listen to them, that's something that I think we don't really do as much because, like you said, and this was something that I did when I first started, where it wasn't that I necessarily did not care what they were saying, but it was more of like how do you respond to what they're saying, and so that's why I wanted to focus. That's why like my next thing I was gonna say was like be unscripted rather than scripted, because script going off a script can be safe, and sometimes it's a good thing. But there are times where people will say something and you just don't know how to respond, or you think like, which can sometimes be a good thing because it's like that's a human moment. And then there are times where you go, someone will say something and you realize I don't want to go to that next question or the next topic because there's something that you said that was really interesting. And so when you talked about how you did a documentary for your grandma because she had Alzheimer's, and you were done talking, I didn't know how to respond to that because it's like, wow, that was something meaningful and impactful that you made, and it was emotional because it was someone that that was being affected, and you can probably see it right now. Like I didn't know what to say, but like sometimes being unscripted is better than being scripted. And it's funny because sometimes I'll tell people when it comes to my podcast, I don't like to play it safe where it's like I don't want to be like question one, question two, question three. It's more like here's a topic that I want to talk about if you're comfortable, and let's see how many side conversations we can have because there's something that you can say that can really be meaningful and you can't just go to the next question. So sometimes I want to be more unscripted rather than scripted. And will that mean I make mistakes? Yes. But mistakes are what make us humans instead of just focusing on the I guess the safe, instead of just being like question one, question two. I don't want to treat this as an interview. I want to treat it as a conversation. And one more thing I wanted to add before, because I know you're probably going to say something. Sometimes, like there are people, regardless if they have a million followers or zero followers, they're still human beings, and they will be the first ones to tell you that they don't want to be known as the person that people know them for. They just want to be known as someone just like you and me, just normal human beings. And I struggle with that. But then when I first, like when I would first, as I would get ready for a conversation where I'm like, I don't know what to expect. But then the first 5 or 10 minutes after talking to them, I realized, oh, they're a human being that wants to share their stories in a honest way.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's a really good point, and I like that about this podcast. One of the things that I respected the most is when you sent me the run sheet last week. There was like, I actually have it here on the side: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kind of bullet points of like what we're going to talk about, which I really like, as opposed to sending me 40 questions of being like, I'm going to ask this, and this, and this. And I think that's cool because it allows for like natural fluidity. And I think when I'm interviewing people, I do the same thing. I'm not interested in having all the questions because I know that if I have all the questions before I start, then I'm just going to do the same interview that everyone else has done with that person. It's about like I'm listening to the conversation and going, okay, well, what are interesting things we can look into? What are interesting things we can pry into and discuss. So yeah, I think that's really important, and it actually reminds me of a piece of advice that I heard on a interview with a really incredible documentary filmmaker named Matthew Heineman the other day, and he was quoting from someone else. So I'm going to completely paraphrase and probably butcher the quote, and I don't remember who that person was, so unfortunately I can't attribute the quote to them. But the quote read something like, "If you if you end with the story that you started with, then you haven't done a good job at sort of really diving into what the story is." And so I think it's important to remain sort of impartial and to sit back and observe and go, what's interesting about this, and what is my angle when it comes to this story, and how can I tell the story in a way that nobody else has told it before. So I think that's really important with anything, whether it's podcasting like this or making a documentary or interviewing someone, or yeah.
Yeah, I really do appreciate it. Yeah, storytelling is difficult, but that's where you got to figure out how can I be more creative, how can I be creative and unique. And sometimes that means not being safe and taking those risks, because it's better than not taking them and not realizing how to grow, kind of like what we talked about. I do want to talk about your company, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because I made a mistake when I sent you the sheet. You have a production company known as Tudor 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 Park Productions. Tell me a little bit about the company, how it started, and what's it been like being a part of this project.
Yeah, so Tudor Park Productions, we're based in LA. I'm the only full-time employee, but we have a set of contractors in LA, in New York, and London, and in New Zealand. And kind of our goal is to create video content that sort of meets the intersection between high end and high performance. So the idea is that we create social media content and documentary content for brands and individuals, but we also are young. We're primarily Gen Zers, not all of us, but most of us are Gen Zers. And we understand how the algorithm works. We understand that it's ever changing and rapidly changing. And we try and stay kind of tapped in so that we can create stuff that's high production value, but that's also kind of set to perform in the current zeitgeist and current landscape. So that's sort of what the company does. And then in addition to that, I've always had an interest since I was young in telling stories that make an impact, that make a difference. I see storytelling as a tool that can create empathy. And I think empathy is one of the biggest sort of catalysts to create tangible change in our real world. So I think I see our role in also creating, content that's going to make a difference, content that's going to make an impact. That's going to, I really want, my dream is to have people watch something that I've made that will, they'll be at the dinner table that night with their family, and they'll be like, "Hey, did you see this documentary? It blew my mind. It got me thinking about this, and that. And as a result, I want to go and do this and this, and you should watch it." And then that person goes off and they're talking about that on their lunch break the next day with their friends and that sort of thing. I want to kind of create those conversations with the stuff that I'm making. Um, the company is relatively new. I only started it in about a year ago, actually, in sort of August, September last year is when we launched. And so yeah, there's two kind of main documentary projects I'm working on at the moment that are really sort of lighting my fire. But we've also been lucky, we work with a lot of really awesome clients and really cool, interesting people doing great stuff. And I really enjoy telling their stories and creating cool content for them as well.
Yeah, when you were talking about how you want to make content where people are at the dinner table and talking about the content that you produce, I think that's what makes, like, that's what, I guess, the end goal for each storytelling. That's the end goal for, like, whenever you're telling stories, because you mentioned about that quote, and I'm gonna probably botch it, but it's like, if you end the story with the same way that you started, then it's not really an interesting story. And so you want to be able to create stories where people are really talking about it. And it doesn't matter what, because I know there are different types of movies and different types of documentaries, but the ones that really stick out to me are the ones where I'm constantly thinking about the issue, or the topic. So it's like, wow, I can't believe this thing happened, or I can't believe this thing happened. Instead of just looking at it and going, yeah, I watched a movie, it was great, or it was fine. Like, if you don't have any connection or a feeling to it, then you're not going to really talk about it. And it's not just about, like, promoting and publicity thing. I'm not talking about that aspect, but it's like, you want people to be thinking. You want people to feel a certain way as opposed to feeling neutral. Because I've seen movies where I'm like, okay, yeah, I watched a movie for 2 to 3 hours, or a documentary, but I didn't feel anything. But then there are documentaries I've seen or I've watched where I'm like, wow, it just gets me thinking. And sometimes you ask, like, stupid questions, but, like, just thinking is much better, as like, thinking about something is better than not thinking, which I know everyone knows that, but, like, you get what I'm saying? Like, you want to be able to
Yeah.
get them to have that, I guess, in, like, sports terms, like a post-game analysis, of if that makes sense.
Yeah. What was the last thing that you watched that you feel like kind of did that for you?
So I was watching a movie called The Black Klansman, and it
I've
was
seen it.
about, you've seen it?
Brilliant film. Yes.
Yeah, so, like, for
Wonderful.
those who don't know, it's about a black police officer, first police officer in the Colorado Springs police department where he was investigating the Ku Klux Klan, and the way he did it was that he pretended that he was actually white, and so on the phone he pretended to sound like a white man, but in person he had one of his friends who would actually participate in the Klan events, and the funny thing is, so in real life, I actually read the book as well. In real life, the his friend was not Jewish, but in the movie, he's Jewish, and the Ku Klux Klan hates people, not just people of color, but also people who are Jewish because for some other reason. And so, what I really took away from that is it's so interesting how one person can just tackle or can just find a way to um, I forget the word I'm looking for, but it's like a way to tackle racism and like almost like embarrassing themselves. And it's like if only like that was one person that was able to do this. And I don't know exactly the time span of how long it took. I just saw the story and I'm like, I can't believe he did this. And so it's like, can you imagine if we can all do it, right? We can easily tackle the issue of racism and discrimination. And so I just left feeling like just like wow, I can't believe it one person did that, because as a person of color trying to go against a white supremacist organization, that is extremely scary. So to be able to pull a stunt like this, it was just like wow, I can't believe he did that. And then the movie ends with I think the protest at the Unite the Rally protests for some reason, and it was talking about how people were fighting for well, like white supremacists were showing their support for white supremacy, and then you had protesters um, who were saying like no to white supremacy, we don't support this, and then just seeing the footage of some of the footage that happened in at the protest or at that event, and then the movie ending with like the American flag upside down, black and white, and it just like the movie was great, but then it has like this feeling like wow, like we're still going through this thing today, like racism is still happening today. But yeah, it just gave me this like it was a great movie, but then it gave you that weird feeling in your stomach. So but all that to say, like that movie was just so like it was just like I don't want to say it changed my views on racism or on race, but it's like I can't believe one person was able to do this, but then also maybe start talking about race in America and talking about like, you know, how can we try to make sure that maybe we don't need to pull the same stunt, but how can we make sure we get together to tackle this issue? I know that was a long response, but like that was something that really I took away from, and I just loved the film so much and the book as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's films like that, right? That just leave you thinking after. And I agree with like the last maybe 5 to 10 minutes. It's been a while since I've seen it, but the last 5 to 10 minutes of that film, when it then kind of takes, this was something that happened, but a lot of what is happening in this movie is still happening now. And here's an example of like, I think that film was probably came out about
18,
2016, 17,
2018.
18,
Yeah.
18. Yeah. And it shows footage from incidents that had happened that year and the year before. And it's like, this is still very real and you still need to care about this. And it's, yeah, I think that's a great example of like a really impactful film that leaves you thinking far after you've left the cinema or far after you've left your couch.
Before I let you go, I mentioned in the beginning how because of the work that you do, you've been able to work with brands such as Hollister and Coca-Cola, and then people such as David Blaine and Addison Rae. And of the people that I found, or the things that I mentioned, or the people that I found, I thought David Blaine was really interesting because if you haven't seen his magic tricks, it's just absolutely insane. But I don't want to talk about what it's like to work with them. I do want to ask you, and you brought this up when we were talking about, regardless of if they have 100 million followers or no followers at all, or whatever that may be. I mean, sometimes in social media we judge people based on followers for some reason. But like for you, is it something that you actually struggle with? Because when you meet people who are influential, sometimes it's like you don't like they're human, but are they human? If that makes sense, because they're so recognized. When you're working with people or brands, like do you sometimes forget that they are human beings, even if you have looked up to them or have been a fan of them in whatever way that may be, that the moment you're in their presence, that it's like oh they're just like you. it's hard to go, oh, they're a human being, because at that moment you're going, it's freaking David Blaine or it's freaking whoever. Like, do you ever forget that they're human beings?
It's a really good question. I don't think so. I think there's definitely been times when that pressure has been felt and you're like, gosh, this and it's more from a perspective of like, because I'm working with this person, I know this is going to get seen by a lot of people, so I don't want to mess it up. But not really. And I think like fame is not something that I care that much about. People are people to me, and I think that my sort of stance on that and the fact that I don't care that much is kind of what also means that these people, I hope, probably enjoy working with me more, because I don't care. Like, you could be a PA or Barack Obama. At the end of the day, the way I see it is like, we're all there to do a job. We're there to creatively collaborate. And if anything, if fame and ego gets in the way of that and hinders the ability to creatively collaborate, I just find that frustrating. And I've been lucky that hasn't really happened too many times in my career. Definitely not with the people that you've mentioned. They're all incredible. But there has been times where egos have gotten in the way of us being able to make the best thing possible. And that pisses me off, and I don't really enjoy it. And I don't usually work with that person again. Because, at the end of the day, we're all there to make cool stuff. It's in everyone's best interest for what we make to be the best it can possibly be. And if someone's fame is going to get in the way of that, then yeah, that's a problem.
What I'll say before we end is everything you just said is exactly what I want to do with my podcast, which is I don't want to focus on the success stories, but just recognizing that they're just acknowledging that they're human beings. And yeah, like instead of just looking at I always say this, and sometimes I still struggle explaining to people exactly what I mean, but it's like, don't focus on who they are, just focus on what they are. And it doesn't matter how successful they are, they're just human beings, and you just want to create something special. And we need to live in a world where it cannot be me versus you, regardless of who that person is, but it's me and you tackling an issue, whatever that may be. So for us, it's like, I shouldn't look at it as, oh, it's me versus Hunter. It's me and Hunter being able to work on something special. I don't know why, but sometimes I don't know if the me versus you thing made sense, but like sometimes like comparison and like, should we treat a person a certain way because of this? And it's like, no, they're just humans. And it's unfortunate, because I've seen videos where people talk about fame, but in like the most, like, I can't believe they said this, where it's like, oh, because I'm famous, I have to cut people off. And it's like, wait, or like, and why'd you cut people off? Oh, because they're not on my level. And it's like, no, you don't cut people off because you're famous. And that's such a bad word. Like, I used to think famous was the best thing that could happen to you. But really, like, when I meet people like you and seeing all the amazing work you're doing, you don't care about being famous. You care more about making impact. And I know Gen Zers, there are definitely Gen Zers that still focus on the famous aspect, but being able to connect with people like you and realizing that you don't look at things as famous or ego, you care more about impact, regardless of where they are in their life. So I really do appreciate that about you.
Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate you saying that. And I think, yeah, especially living in LA, it's not uncommon to come across people with ego, but sometimes it comes from the places you least expect. And I think it comes from a lot of people that feel like they have something to prove. And that, at the end of the day, also just results from their own personal insecurities and that sort of thing. So, I think I still try to see the best in people and realize that, that attitude is coming from a place of pain. And so, I think when I think about it like that, it just reminds me to just kind of, you know let's look after that person. At the end of the day, that they're human beings too, and just because they got a blue tick, it doesn't mean that they are any less susceptible to critique and to their own internal kind of self-doubt. So
Couldn't agree anymore. But Hunter, I just want to say thank you so much for joining the podcast. I know I was funny because I was like thinking about, how long this conversation is going to be, because I was really worried that we're going to go really long, because I was focusing so much on those unscripted conversations, but I thought that it was really impactful. But nevertheless, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Thank you for sharing your story. and I hope you continue to. Well, no, I know you're going to continue to inspire stories, but I do hope we get to meet in person and have more conversations when it comes to storytelling, because I really did enjoy this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, man. This has been really fun, and looking forward to continuing to follow your journey and the podcast as well.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.